The woman standing in the dusty street of Deming, New Mexico, had a face that made grown men look away, and Martha Zimmerman had long since stopped caring. The scar that twisted from her left temple down to her jawline was a permanent reminder of the fire that had taken her family 5 years ago in 1873. And now, in the spring of 1878, she stood outside the general store with a hand-lettered sign that read, "Hard worker. Any job considered." Her worn blue dress hung loose on her thin frame, and her brown hair was pulled back in a severe bun, as if she was trying to disappear entirely except for the one part of her that nobody could ignore. Matthew O'Brien leaned against the hitching post across the street, his gray eyes taking in the sight with something between pity and curiosity. He was 32 years old, tall and lean from years of ranch work, with dark hair that needed cutting and a beard he kept forgetting to trim properly. His ranch sat 5 miles outside of town, a decent spread with good water and better grazing, but it was too much for one man to manage alone. He had been coming into town specifically to find help, someone willing to work hard for fair wages, but every hand he had approached either had better offers or was not interested in the isolation his place offered. He watched as 2 women walked past Martha, their faces turned deliberately away, their skirts pulled slightly aside as if even proximity to the scarred woman might somehow contaminate them. Martha's expression never changed, just that same blank acceptance he had seen on the faces of wounded soldiers during his brief time in the cavalry. She was not expecting kindness, was not even hoping for it anymore. Matthew pushed off from the post and crossed the street, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. The afternoon sun beat down hard, and he could feel sweat beginning to gather under his collar. When he stopped in front of Martha, she looked up at him with eyes that were a startling green, clear and intelligent despite the exhaustion that lined her face. "Can you cook?" he asked without preamble. Martha blinked, clearly not expecting such a direct question. "Yes, sir. I can cook, clean, mend, tend animals, work a garden, and do basic carpentry if needed." "What happened to your face?" The question was blunt, but Matthew had learned long ago that dancing around difficult subjects only made them worse. "House fire. Lost my parents and 2 brothers. I got out through a window, but a burning beam caught me on the way." Her voice was steady, factual, as if she was recounting something that had happened to someone else. Matthew nodded. "I have a ranch 5 miles north of here. 200 acres, maybe 60 head of cattle, some horses, chickens, and a milk cow. The house has 3 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and a well that never runs dry. I need someone who can keep the house, help with the animals when needed, and cook decent meals. I can pay $20 a month plus room and board. You would have your own room with a lock on the door, and I give you my word as a Christian man that you would be safe and respected under my roof." Martha stared at him as if he had just spoken in a foreign language. "You want to hire me to live at your ranch?" "That is what I just said." Matthew shifted his weight, suddenly aware of how many people were watching this exchange. "I know what you are thinking. You are wondering what kind of man offers a job like this to a woman he just met on the street. The truth is, I am tired of living alone, tired of burning my own cooking, and tired of watching my house fall apart because I do not have time to maintain it properly. I need help, and you are looking for work. Seems straightforward to me." "People will talk," Martha said quietly. "They will assume things. People always talk. I stopped caring what the gossips of Deming think about me when my wife died 3 years ago and half the town decided I must have driven her to an early grave with my difficult ways." There was bitterness in his voice, old and familiar. "Sarah died of pneumonia, plain and simple, but that did not stop the tongues from wagging. So if you are worried about my reputation, do not be. It has already been thoroughly dragged through the mud. Martha looked down at her sign, then back up at Matthew. Something in her expression had changed, a tiny spark of hope that she was clearly trying to suppress. When would you want me to start? Today, if you are willing. I rode in this morning and plan to stay the night at the boarding house, but if you can be ready to leave within the hour, we can be back at the ranch before dark. I do not have much to pack, just what I am wearing and a few things in my room at the boarding house. She hesitated, then added, "Why are you doing this? Really?" Matthew considered the question, looking past her at the harsh landscape that surrounded Deming. The town had sprung up around the railroad depot, a collection of wooden buildings and dusty streets in the middle of territory that had only recently stopped being quite so wild. It was a place where people came to reinvent themselves, to escape their pasts, or to carve out new futures from the unforgiving land. "Because I know what it is like to be judged for things beyond your control," he said finally. "And because you have honest eyes. I have hired men who looked respectable and turned out to be thieves or drunks. I figure a woman who stands in the street advertising her willingness to work hard is more trustworthy than most." Martha folded her sign carefully, her scarred hands moving with precision. "I will get my things." "Where should I meet you?" "The livery stable. I need to pick up my horse and wagon. Take your time." He touched the brim of his hat and turned away, very aware of the stares following him as he walked back down the street. At the livery, old Pete gave him a knowing look as he hitched up the wagon. "Saw you talking to the Zimmerman woman. Her name is Martha, and I just hired her as my housekeeper." Matthew's tone made it clear the subject was not open for discussion. "No judgment here, boss. Just surprised is all. Most folks would not give her the time of day." Pete secured the last strap and stepped back. "She is a hard worker, I will give her that. Used to do washing for some of the ladies in town until they decided her face was too unsettling for their delicate sensibilities. Then their loss is my gain." Matthew climbed up onto the wagon seat and took the reins. "Thanks for the quick work, Pete." The old man nodded. "You are a good man, Matthew O'Brien. Your Sarah would be proud." The words hit harder than Matthew expected, and he had to swallow past a sudden tightness in his throat. Sarah had been gone for 3 years, but sometimes the grief still ambushed him at unexpected moments. She would have liked Martha, he thought. Sarah had always had a soft spot for strays and outcasts. Martha arrived at the livery carrying a single canvas bag that looked like it held all her worldly possessions. She wore the same blue dress, but had added a worn brown shawl despite the heat. Her face was set in determined lines as she approached the wagon, and Matthew could see the tension in her shoulders, as if she was expecting him to have changed his mind. "Need help getting up?" he asked, offering his hand. She took it, her palm rough with calluses, and pulled herself up onto the seat beside him with practiced ease. "Thank you." They rode out of Deming in silence, the wagon wheels creaking steadily as they left the town behind. The landscape was harsh and beautiful, all red rock and scrub brush, with mountains rising in the distance like promises of cooler air. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. After about a mile, Martha finally spoke. "You mentioned your wife died. How long were you married?" 5 years. "We met back in Kansas, married there, and came out here together looking for a fresh start. She loved New Mexico, said the sky was bigger than anywhere else in the world." Matthew kept his eyes on the road ahead. "We were building something good. Then one winter she caught a cough that turned into something worse, and by spring she was gone. I am sorry." The words were simple but sincere. "Life is hard out here. You learn to accept it or it breaks you," He glanced at her. What about you? Any family left besides the ones you lost in the fire? No. My parents came west from Ohio when I was young. They wanted land, opportunity, all the usual dreams. We had a small farm outside of Santa Fe. After the fire, there was nothing keeping me there, so I drifted until I ended up in Deming. Martha adjusted her shawl. I tried finding work, but as you saw, people are not exactly lining up to hire me. Their loss, Matthew said again and meant it. The ranch came into view as they crested a low rise, and Matthew felt the familiar satisfaction of seeing his land spread out before him. The house was adobe, squat and sturdy with a covered porch and real glass windows that he had hauled all the way from Albuquerque. The barn and outbuildings were in good repair, and he could see his cattle scattered across the grazing land, dark shapes against the golden grass. "It is beautiful," Martha said quietly, and there was such genuine appreciation in her voice that Matthew felt a spark of pride. "It is home. Come on, I will show you around before the light fades completely." He helped her down from the wagon and led her first to the house. The interior was dim and cooler than outside, with thick walls that kept out the worst of the heat. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and a sturdy wooden table in the center. Doors led off to the bedrooms, and Matthew pointed to the one on the left. "That was going to be a nursery, but we never got the chance to use it. It is yours now. It has a bed, a dresser, and a trunk for storage. The lock works, and I will give you the only key." He pulled a small iron key from his pocket and handed it to her. "The room next to it is mine, and the one on the right side of the house is for storage right now, mostly just extra supplies and such." Martha took the key and held it in her palm like it was something precious. "Thank you. I will earn my keep, I promise. I believe you." Matthew moved back toward the kitchen area. "I keep basic supplies stocked: flour, beans, bacon, coffee, dried fruit. There is a root cellar out back that stays cool year-round. The chickens usually give us enough eggs, and the garden is somewhat neglected but could probably be revived with some work. Once a month I go into town for supplies, and you are welcome to come along if you want, or you can give me a list of anything particular you need." "I would like to come along if that is acceptable. I am not afraid of people staring, and I can help carry supplies." Martha set her bag down by the door to her new room. "Should I start preparing supper?" Matthew glanced out the window at the fading light. "Tomorrow is soon enough. Tonight, let me show you what I have been eating, and you can tell me how much improvement I need." He moved to the pantry and pulled out some hardtack, dried beef, and a tin of beans. "This is my usual fare." Martha made a face. "No wonder you were eager to hire a cook. This is barely fit for survival, let alone actual living. Hence my desperation." Matthew found himself almost smiling, which felt strange. He could not remember the last time he had felt like smiling about anything. There is a spring house with fresh water about 50 yards behind the main house. The well water is fine for everything else, but the spring water is better for drinking. They ate their meager supper in companionable silence, and afterward Martha excused herself to her room. Matthew heard the quiet click of the lock engaging and felt oddly glad that she felt safe enough to take that simple precaution. He sat at the table for a while longer, drinking coffee and listening to the sounds of the ranch settling in for the night. The cattle lowed occasionally in the distance, and somewhere a coyote called out to the rising moon. For the first time in 3 years, his house did not feel quite so empty. Martha woke before dawn, her internal clock still set to the rhythms of hard work and early rising. She lay in the narrow bed for a moment, orienting herself to the unfamiliar room, then rose and dressed quickly in the dim pre-dawn light. Her room was simple but clean, with whitewashed walls and a small window that looked out toward the eastern horizon. She unlocked her door and stepped quietly into the main room, not wanting to wake Matthew if he was still sleeping. He was already up, standing by the stove and attempting to coax a fire to life with varying degrees of success. He looked up when she entered, his hair still mussed from sleep. "Morning. I was trying to get coffee started before I woke you, but I think the stove is staging a rebellion." Martha moved to his side and examined the situation. "You have too much kindling and not enough airflow. Here, let me." She quickly rearranged the wood and within minutes had a proper fire going. "I will have coffee ready shortly, and then I can make a real breakfast if you have eggs and flour." "Both. The chickens are usually pretty generous and there is plenty of flour." Matthew stepped back and let her take over the kitchen area, clearly relieved. "I need to check on the cattle and do morning rounds. I will be back in about an hour." Martha nodded and set about exploring the kitchen properly. It was well equipped but clearly underutilized, with good cast iron pots and pans that just needed some cleaning. She found the coffee, ground it fresh, and had a pot brewing by the time Matthew had his boots on and was heading out the door. The morning air was cool and sweet, and Martha stepped out onto the porch to watch the sun rise over the eastern mountains. The sky went from deep purple to pink to blazing gold in a matter of minutes, and she understood what Matthew's wife had meant about the sky being bigger here. It felt like you could see forever. By the time Matthew returned, she had breakfast ready: scrambled eggs with wild onions she had found growing near the spring house, biscuits that were golden and flaky, and thick slices of bacon fried until crisp. The coffee was hot and strong, and she had even found some honey in the pantry to sweeten it. Matthew stopped in the doorway and just stared. "I think I might be dreaming. Sit down before it gets cold." Martha poured coffee for both of them and sat across from him at the table. She watched as he took his first bite of biscuit, saw his eyes close in something like reverence, and felt a small glow of satisfaction. "This is incredible," he said when he could speak again. "I had forgotten food could taste like this. This is basic cooking. Wait until I have time to do something more elaborate." Martha ate her own breakfast, savoring the simple pleasure of a hot meal eaten at a real table instead of standing over a boarding house sink. "What needs doing today? Besides the regular animal care, I mean." Matthew considered as he worked his way through his food. "The garden needs attention if you feel up to it. Some of the fence line on the south pasture needs mending, which I will handle. The chicken coop could use cleaning. And if you have time, there is mending that has been piling up for longer than I care to admit. I can handle all of that except the fence line." Martha refilled his coffee. "Is there a particular time you prefer meals?" "I am usually up before dawn. Breakfast around now works fine." "Midday meal can be simple, just something to keep energy up. Supper whenever the work is done, usually around sunset." He paused. "But I do not want you working yourself to exhaustion. This is not meant to be a situation where I work you into the ground for minimal pay." "I appreciate that, but I am used to hard work. It feels good to have purpose again." Martha stood and began gathering the dishes. "Go tend your fence. I will handle things here." The days fell into a pattern after that, each one building on the last until Martha could hardly remember what her life had been like before the ranch. She rose early, made breakfast, and then threw herself into the work of maintaining a home. The garden responded to her attention with almost desperate enthusiasm, and within 2 weeks she had lettuce, radishes, and herbs growing strong. The chicken coop was cleaned and reorganized, the hens rewarding her with more eggs than 2 people could easily eat. Matthew was a steady, quiet presence, working from dawn until dusk on the endless tasks that came with running a ranch. He was patient with her when she asked questions about the animals, and appreciative when she brought him cold water while he worked in the heat. They ate their meals together, their conversation gradually growing easier and more natural as they learned each other's rhythms. One evening, about 3 weeks after Martha's arrival, Matthew came in from the range looking troubled. She was just putting supper on the table and saw immediately that something was wrong. "What happened?" "Lost a calf today. Mountain lion by the looks of it. Found the mother standing over what was left." He washed his hands at the basin, his movements rough with frustration. "I thought we had seen the last of that cat last month, but apparently he is back." Martha set a plate in front of him. "Will you hunt it?" "Have to. Cannot afford to lose cattle, and once a lion gets a taste for easy prey, it will keep coming back." He sat heavily. "I hate killing them. They are just trying to survive like everything else out here, but I cannot let it decimate my herd." "When will you go?" "Tomorrow, probably. I will track it from where I found the calf, see if I can pick up its trail." He looked up at her. "You will be alone here during the day." "I am sorry to leave you, but the animals still need tending. I can manage. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I grew up around cattle and horses." Martha sat across from him. "But I would be lying if I said I was not nervous about a mountain lion roaming around. It will not come near the house, not with human scent this strong. They are smart and cautious, but keep the rifle loaded and nearby just in case." He pointed to the Winchester hanging above the door. "You know how to shoot. My father taught me. It has been a while, but yes." They ate in contemplative silence, and afterward Martha found herself restless, unable to settle into her usual evening routine of mending or raiding. She stepped out onto the porch and found Matthew already there, sitting on the steps and looking out at the darkening landscape. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. "It is your porch too." He moved over slightly, making room. Martha sat, very aware of how close they were, their shoulders almost touching. In the month she had been here, they had maintained a careful physical distance from each other, neither wanting to presume or make the other uncomfortable. But tonight, with danger lurking somewhere out in the darkness, that distance felt less important. "I want to thank you," she said quietly, "for taking a chance on me, for treating me like a person instead of a curiosity or something to be pitied." Matthew was quiet for a moment. "You do not need to thank me. You have more than earned your place here. Still, you changed my life. I was running out of options in Deming, running out of hope. Another few weeks and I might have done something desperate." She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "People look at my face and assume I must be broken inside too, like the scars go all the way through. Do they?" The question was gentle, curious rather than invasive. Martha considered. "Sometimes. There are moments when I look in a mirror and do not recognize the woman looking back, when I wonder if the fire burned away parts of me that I will never get back. But then I have days like today, where I watch the garden growing and taste the bread I baked and feel the satisfaction of work well done, and I think maybe I am not as broken as I feared." "You are not broken at all." Matthew's voice was firm. "You are scarred, yes, but scars just mean you survived something terrible. They mean you are stronger than whatever tried to destroy you." Martha felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "You are a kind man, Matthew O'Brien. I am a practical man. I say what I see, and I see a woman who works harder than any hand I ever hired, who takes pride in her work, and who has brought life back to a house that was dying of loneliness." He stood and offered his hand. "Come on, it is getting cold. Let us go inside." She took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet, and for just a moment they stood close enough that she could see the silver thread starting to show in his dark hair, could smell the soap he had used when washing up for supper. Then the moment passed and they moved apart, but something had shifted between them. Some invisible line had been crossed. Matthew left at first light the next morning, his rifle across his saddle and supplies for a full day in his pack. Martha watched him ride out, feeling an anxiety she had not expected. She told herself it was just concern for a good employer, nothing more, but the worry that sat heavy in her chest suggested otherwise. She threw herself into work, cleaning the house from top to bottom, baking bread, churning butter, and checking on the garden. The chickens got fresh water and feed, and she spent an hour brushing down the 2 horses Matthew kept in the barn, talking to them in a low voice about nothing in particular. Around midday, she heard riders approaching and felt her heart jump into her throat. She grabbed the rifle from above the door and stepped out onto the porch, trying to look more confident than she felt. 3 men rode into the yard, their horses lathered and tired-looking. They were rough types, all dusty clothes and hard eyes, and Martha felt her grip tighten on the rifle. "Help you gentlemen," she called out, keeping her voice steady. The man in front, a heavy-set fellow with a thick beard, looked her up and down with an expression that made her skin crawl. "We are looking for water for our horses. Saw the ranch from the road and figured we would ask hospitality. The water trough is by the barn. Help yourselves." Martha did not lower the rifle, mighty unfriendly welcome for travelers. The second man, younger and lean, smiled in a way that did not reach his eyes. "We are not here to cause trouble, just need water and maybe a meal if you can spare it." "Water is free. Food costs money." Martha was very aware that she was alone, that Matthew might be miles away tracking his mountain lion, and that these men looked like the type who would take advantage of that situation if given the chance. The third man, older with a gray-shot beard, had been quiet until now. "That is a mighty big rifle for a woman to be handling alone. You sure you know how to use it? My father was a good teacher. Now water your horses and move along." Martha's palms were sweating, but she kept the rifle steady. The bearded leader laughed. "No need to be so hostile. We are just passing through." But his eyes lingered on the house, on the barn, clearly assessing what might be worth taking. They watered their horses, taking their time about it, and Martha stayed on the porch the entire time, rifle ready. She was starting to calculate how fast she could get back inside and bar the door when she heard another horse approaching at speed. Matthew came around the barn at a gallop, taking in the situation immediately. He reined in his horse, his own rifle suddenly in his hands, his expression hard. "You boys lost." His voice was deceptively mild. "Just watering our horses, friend. No harm meant." The bearded man raised his hand slightly, but there was challenge in his eyes. "Water is had, so you can move on now. This is private property." Matthew positioned his horse between the men and the porch where Martha stood. "We were just leaving." The gray, bearded man seemed more cautious than his companions. "Come on, boys. No point in causing trouble where none is needed." They mounted up and rode out slowly, deliberately, making it clear they were not being run off but choosing to leave. Matthew stayed mounted until they were out of sight, then finally dismounted and walked up to the porch. "You did good," he said, taking the rifle from her gently. "Kept your head, kept them at distance." Martha found she was shaking now that the danger had passed. "I was terrified. Being scared and being brave are not opposites. Brave is being scared and doing what needs doing anyway." He ushered her inside. "Come on, sit down before you fall down." She sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. Matthew poured her a glass of water from the pitcher on the table and pressed it into her hands. "Did you find the mountain lion?" she asked, needing to focus on something other than the fear still coursing through her. "Found it and dealt with it." It was an old male, probably got pushed out of its territory by younger cats and was taking easier prey because it could not hunt properly anymore. He sat across from her, I do not like killing, but it was him or my livelihood. I am glad you came back when you did." Martha sipped her water, feeling her heartbeat slowly return to normal. "I had a feeling something was wrong. Cannot explain it, just got this sense that I needed to get back to the ranch." He ran a hand through his hair. "Those men might come back. I am going to ride into town tomorrow and let the sheriff know about them, get descriptions circulated. But in the meantime, I want you to keep that rifle close." "I will." Martha met his eyes. "Thank you for coming back." "Always," he said simply, and the weight of that single word settled between them like a promise. That night, Martha lay in bed unable to sleep, her mind replaying the day's events. She had been alone before, had faced difficulties and dangers, but knowing that Matthew had rushed back because he sensed she might need him touched something deep inside her chest. It had been so long since anyone had cared about her well-being, since anyone had seen her as worth protecting. The scar on her face throbbed the way it sometimes did when she was stressed, a phantom pain that never quite went away. She touched the twisted skin, tracing the familiar path from temple to jaw, and wondered what Matthew really saw when he looked at her. Did he see past the scar to the woman beneath, or was he just better at hiding his revulsion than most in the morning? Matthew made good on his promise to ride into Deming. He asked Martha if she wanted to come along, but she declined, not quite ready to face the stares and whispers of town after the stress of the previous day. Instead, she spent the morning working in the garden, finding comfort in the simple act of tending growing things. She was harvesting lettuce when she heard a wagon approaching. Looking up, she was surprised to see a woman driving, with 2 young children visible in the back. The woman pulled to a stop near the house and climbed down with the practiced ease of someone used to handling a team. "Hello," the woman called out. "I hope I am not intruding. I am Elizabeth Morrison from the ranch about 3 miles east of here. My husband Peter and Matthew know each other from the Cattlemen's Association." Martha stood, very aware of the dirt on her hands and dress, and the way the woman's eyes flickered to her scar before quickly looking away. "Martha Zimmerman, I am Matthew's housekeeper. Yes, we heard he had hired help. I wanted to come by and introduce myself and to bring you these." Elizabeth reached into her wagon and pulled out a basket covered with a cloth. "Some preserves I put up last fall, and a few other things I thought you might enjoy." Martha took the basket cautiously, not quite sure what to make of this overture. "That is very kind of you. I also wanted to say welcome to the area. I know it can be lonely out here, especially for women. We are few and far between in this part of New Mexico, and I think it is important we look out for each other." Elizabeth's smile was genuine, and when she looked at Martha again, she met her eyes directly instead of focusing on the scar. "I hope you will consider visiting sometime. My children can be a handful, but they are good company, and I confess, I sometimes crave adult conversation that does not revolve around cattle prices." "I would like that," Martha heard herself saying. "Thank you for the welcome." They talked for a few more minutes, Elizabeth filling her in on the other ranches in the area, and the schedule for the monthly community gatherings that rotated between properties. When she finally left, Martha stood holding the basket and feeling something she had not experienced in years, the possibility of friendship. Matthew returned from town late in the afternoon, his expression grim. "Sheriff is going to keep an eye out for those men, but he said without them actually doing anything, there is not much he can do. He suggested we might want to attend the community gathering next week at the Sullivan Ranch. Said there is safety in neighbors knowing neighbors." "Elizabeth Morrison came by today. She mentioned those gatherings." Martha set coffee in front of him. "Do you usually go?" "I have not since Sarah died. Did not see the point of socializing when I had nothing to be social about." He looked at her over the rim of his cup. "But maybe it is time to change that. Would you be willing to go with me? People will stare." "Let them. You are my employee and part of my household. You have as much right to be there as anyone." He set his cup down firmly. "Besides, Peter Morrison is a good man, and if his wife came out here to welcome you, that is a good sign. Not everyone in this territory is small-minded." The week leading up to the gathering passed quickly, filled with the usual work plus Martha's preparations. She insisted on bringing food, not wanting to arrive empty-handed, and spent 2 days baking and cooking until Matthew protested that she was going to exhaust herself. "These people need to know that you have a proper housekeeper now, one who can contribute to a community meal," she said stubbornly, surveying her array of pies, bread, and preserves. "They need to know that I have a stubborn woman working for me who does not know when to rest," Matthew countered, but there was affection in his voice. The day of the gathering arrived warm and clear. Martha dressed in her best dress, a green calico that she had not worn since before the fire because she had nowhere worth wearing it to. She brushed her hair until it shone and pinned it up carefully, and for just a moment allowed herself to look in the small mirror above her dresser. The scar was still there, still prominent and impossible to ignore, but today she chose to see what Matthew saw. A survivor, not a victim. The Sullivan Ranch was larger than Matthew's, with a big house and several outbuildings. There were already a dozen wagons there when they arrived, and Martha could see people gathered in small groups around the yard. Her stomach clenched with anxiety, but she took a deep breath and climbed down from the wagon with her head high. Elizabeth Morrison spotted them immediately and came over with a welcoming smile. "Martha, Matthew, I am so glad you came. Here, let me help with those dishes." Other women gradually approached, some more hesitantly than others. There were the inevitable stares and a few poorly concealed whispers, but there were also genuine smiles and warm greetings. Martha found herself drawn into conversations about recipes and gardening, and slowly felt the tight knot in her chest begin to loosen. Matthew stayed nearby, never hovering but always within sight, and Martha was grateful for his quiet support. She watched as he talked with the other ranchers, noticed the way they respected him, valued his opinion. He was well regarded in this community, and his acceptance of her gave others permission to do the same. The meal was served in the early afternoon, long tables laden with food set up in the shade of the house. Martha's pies were admired and quickly consumed, and several women asked for her recipe. She sat with Elizabeth and a few other ranch wives, listening to their easy banter and feeling the strangeness of belonging to something again. After the meal, the men gathered to discuss ranch business while the women cleaned up, and the children ran wild in the surrounding fields. Martha was helping wash dishes when she overheard 2 women talking behind her. "I still say it is strange, him hiring a scarred woman like that. What kind of work can she really do? Maybe she does other kinds of work, if you know what I mean. He has been lonely since his wife died." Martha felt her face flush hot, but before she could turn around, Elizabeth's voice cut through sharp and clear. "That is enough, both of you. Martha is a respectable woman doing honest work, and Matthew O'Brien is a good man who deserves better than your nasty insinuations. If you cannot be civil, you can leave." There was a shocked silence, and then the sound of the 2 women hurrying away. Martha turned to find Elizabeth looking at her with sympathy. "Some people never learned proper manners. Do not let them get to you." "I am used to it," Martha said quietly. "But thank you for defending me. We women have to stand together out here. God knows the land is hard enough without us making it harder on each other." Elizabeth handed her another dish to dry. "Besides, Anyone with eyes can see that you and Matthew have a perfectly proper arrangement. And even if you did not, it would be none of their business. As the afternoon wore on, Martha found herself relaxing in a way she had not in years. There was something healing about being part of a community again, about being seen as a person rather than just a scar. When it came time to leave, she realized she was genuinely disappointed. On the ride home, Matthew was quiet for a long time before finally speaking. "I saw Elizabeth put those gossips in their place. I am sorry you had to hear that. It is nothing I have not heard before in one form or another." Martha watched the landscape roll past. "But I appreciated her standing up for me, and for you. You know the talk is not true, right? I hired you because I needed help, and I have treated you with respect because that is how people should be treated. Nothing more complicated than that." He paused, then added, "Though I will admit, having you at the ranch has become something I value beyond just the work you do." Martha's heart skipped. "What do you mean?" "I mean that you are good company. I enjoy our conversations at meals, enjoy knowing that I am not alone in that big house. You have become more than just an employee, you are a friend." The words came out somewhat stiffly, as if he was not used to admitting such things. "You have become a friend to me too," Martha said softly. "More than I expected, more than I thought I would find again." They rode the rest of the way home in comfortable silence. But Martha was very aware of a shift happening between them, something deeper than friendship beginning to take root. The summer heat descended on New Mexico with relentless intensity, and the work of the ranch became harder as water grew scarce and the cattle needed more attention. Matthew spent long days riding the range, checking water holes and moving the herd to better grazing. Martha kept the house, tended the garden with precious rationed water, and made sure there was always cold well water and hearty meals waiting when Matthew dragged himself home exhausted each evening. One particularly brutal afternoon, Matthew came in looking drawn and gray. He sat heavily at the table, and Martha noticed immediately that he was favoring his left arm. "What happened?" She moved to his side quickly. "Got thrown when my horse spooked at a rattlesnake, landed wrong." He tried to roll his shoulder and grimaced. "Nothing broken, just wrenched it good." "Let me see." Martha helped him remove his shirt, trying not to notice the breadth of his shoulders or the scars that marked his own skin, evidence of a life lived hard. The shoulder was already starting to bruise, dark purple spreading across the muscle. "I have some liniment that might help." "Sit still." She fetched her supplies and began working the ointment into his shoulder with gentle but firm hands. Matthew tensed at first, then gradually relaxed under her touch. "You are good at this," he said after a while. "I used to help my mother tend injuries on the farm." Animals, people, it is all similar in the basics. She worked in silence for a few more minutes, then said quietly, "You work too hard. You are going to break yourself down. The work does not stop just because I am tired. I know. But you have to take care of yourself, or you will not be able to take care of anything else." She finished with the liniment and stepped back. "Rest that arm tonight. No heavy lifting, no riding tomorrow if you can avoid it." "Yes, doctor." There was amusement in his voice, but also something else, something warmer. Martha busied herself with making supper, very aware of Matthew watching her move around the kitchen. The intimacy of tending his injury had created a new tension between them, not uncomfortable but charged with possibility. That night, a summer storm rolled in, violent and sudden as they often were in New Mexico. Thunder shook the house and lightning turned the darkness bright as day in irregular flashes. Martha lay in her bed, listening to the rain hammer against the roof, and wondered if the garden would survive the onslaught. A particularly loud crack of thunder made her jump, and she heard Matthew moving in the next room. A moment later came a quiet knock on her door. "Martha, you awake?" She unlocked the door and opened it to find him standing there in his nightshirt, his hair disheveled. "I am now." "Is something wrong?" "One of the horses in the barn is terrified of storms. I need to go calm him down before he hurts himself. Thought you might want to know where I was going." "I will come with you." She grabbed her shawl and followed him out into the storm. The rain was cold and driving, soaking them both within seconds. They ran to the barn, and Martha could hear the horse screaming before they even got the door open. Inside, one of the geldings was rearing and kicking at his stall, eyes rolling white with terror. "Easy, Copper. Easy, boy." Matthew moved slowly toward the stall, his voice calm and steady despite the chaos. "It is just noise, nothing that can hurt you." The horse struck out with his front hooves, and Matthew had to dodge back. Martha saw him wince as the movement pulled his injured shoulder, and she stepped forward without thinking. "Let me try." She moved past him and approached the stall from a different angle, singing softly under her breath. It was an old song her mother used to sing, something gentle and wordless, and she let it fill the barn in competition with the storm outside. Copper's ears swiveled toward her, and his rearing became less violent. Martha kept singing, kept her movements slow and non-threatening until she could reach out and touch the horse's neck. He trembled under her hand but did not pull away. "You are all right," she murmured, still touching him, still singing fragments of the song. "Nothing here but a lot of noise and water. You are safe, you are all right." Gradually, Copper calmed, his breathing slowing, his trembling easing. Martha stayed with him, stroking his neck and withers until he finally lowered his head and blew out a long breath. "That was amazing," Matthew said from behind her. "I have never seen him calm down that fast during a storm. My mother had a way with horses. I guess I learned some of it from her." Martha gave Copper one last pat and stepped out of the stall. He should be fine now. They walked back to the house through rain that had gentled to a steady patter. Inside, they stood dripping in the main room, and Martha suddenly became very aware that her nightgown was soaked through and clinging to her body. Matthew seemed to realize the same thing at the same moment, and he quickly looked away. "You should change into something dry. I will get the fire going so you can warm up." His voice was rough. Martha fled to her room and changed quickly, her heart pounding. When she emerged, Matthew had indeed gotten the fire going and was standing in front of it in dry clothes, his back to her. "Thank you for helping with Copper," he said without turning around. "You did not have to do that. I wanted to help." Martha moved to stand beside him at the fire, watching the flames dance. "Matthew, can I ask you something? Anything? When you look at me, what do you see?" The question came out smaller than she intended, vulnerable in a way that scared her. He turned to face her then, his gray eyes serious. "I see a woman who is stronger than she knows. I see someone who lost everything but kept going anyway. I see hands that are gentle with frightened horses and firm with bred dough. I see green eyes that remind me there is still beauty in the world." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away and touch the scar on her face with infinite gentleness. "I see this, and I think about how much pain you must have endured, how brave you must have been to survive it. But it is not all I see. It is not even most of what I see." Martha felt tears welling up, hot and unexpected. "I am afraid," she whispered. "Of what?" "Of hoping. Of wanting things I never thought I could have again." She looked up at him, at this man who had given her back her dignity, her purpose, her sense of worth. "Of caring about you more than is probably wise." Matthew's hand cupped her scarred cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. "I stopped being wise about you weeks ago. Maybe from the first day, when you stood in that street with your sign and your stubborn pride. I told myself it was just loneliness, just practical need, but that was a lie. Martha Zimmerman, you have brought my life back from the dead, and I am falling in love with you. If that is not something you want, tell me now and we will never speak of it again. But if there is any chance you might feel the same, I need you to know that you are wanted. Scars and all, exactly as you are wanted. Martha reached up and covered his hand with hers, pressing his palm against her face. I do feel the same. I love you, Matthew. I think I have been falling in love with you for weeks now, but I was too afraid to admit it, even to myself. He kissed her then, gentle at first and then deeper, his arms coming around her and pulling her close. Martha melted into him, into the solid warmth of his body, and the tender way he held her as if she was something precious. The fire crackled beside them, and the rain drummed on the roof, and she felt something locked and frozen inside her chest finally begin to thaw. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Matthew rested his forehead against hers. I want to do this right. I want to court you properly, ask you to marry me when the time is right. Will you let me do that? Yes, Martha said, and felt joy bubbling up inside her like a spring. Yes, I will let you court me, Matthew O'Brien. They stood together by the fire until the storm passed, and dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, talking quietly about the future they might build together, about hopes and dreams that had seemed impossible just a few months ago. And when Martha finally returned to her room, she left the door unlocked. The courtship was sweet and old-fashioned, conducted with proper restraint despite the fact that they lived under the same roof. Matthew brought Martha wildflowers from the range and carved her a wooden box for her precious belongings. They took walks in the evening after the work was done, hands clasped together, talking about everything and nothing. He kissed her goodnight at her bedroom door and did not presume more, waiting for the formality of marriage to make their union complete. News of their courtship spread through the community, and reactions were mixed. Some people were delighted, others scandalized, but most were simply accepting. At the next community gathering, held at the Morrison Ranch in late August, Martha noticed fewer stares and more genuine friendliness. Elizabeth hugged her warmly and whispered congratulations, and several other women made it clear they approved of the match. You are good for him, Peter Morrison told Martha bluntly. Matthew has been lost since Sarah died. It is good to see him living again instead of just existing. In early September, as the brutal heat began to give way to cooler autumn temperatures, Matthew took Martha into Deming for supplies. After loading the wagon with flour, sugar, coffee, and other necessities, he made an excuse about needing to check on something at the general store and asked her to wait. He returned with a small box and an expression of barely contained nervousness. Right there on the main street of Deming, with people passing by and watching, he got down on one knee in the dust. Martha Zimmerman, you have changed my life in every way that matters. You have filled my house with warmth, my days with purpose, and my heart with love I thought I would never feel again. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Martha looked down at him, this good man who had seen past her scars to the woman beneath, who had given her back her life and then offered to share his with her. Yes, Matthew. Yes, I will marry you. He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band and slipped it onto her finger with shaking hands. Then he stood and kissed her, right there in the middle of town, and she did not care who saw or what they thought. She was happy, truly happy, for the first time in 5 years. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Deming, with half the ranching community in attendance. Elizabeth Morrison stood up as Martha's attendant, and Peter Morrison served as Matthew's best man. Martha wore a new dress made of cream-colored silk that Elizabeth had helped her sew, and she left her hair down except for a few curls pinned back with wildflowers. The preacher stumbled slightly over his words when he saw Martha's scar, but recovered and performed the ceremony with dignity and warmth. When Matthew kissed his bride, there were genuine tears and smiles among the witnesses. Even some of the townspeople who had previously looked down on Martha seemed moved by the obvious love between the couple. The reception was held at the ranch, with neighbors bringing food and drink and well wishes. There was music and dancing, and Matthew held Martha close as they swayed to a fiddle tune, his eyes never leaving her face. "Happy?" he asked softly. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered honestly. As the sun set and the guests began to depart, Elizabeth hugged Martha tightly. "You deserve this happiness. Do not ever let anyone make you think otherwise." "Thank you for being my friend," Martha said, meaning it with all her heart. Finally, they were alone. Matthew carried Martha over the threshold in the traditional manner, and she laughed at the formality of it. "We have been living here together for months, but now you are my wife. That changes everything." He set her down gently and took both her hands in his. "Are you nervous?" "A little," she admitted. "Are you terrified?" he said with a crooked smile. "But also more certain of this than anything else in my life." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, each learning the contours of the other's body, each giving and receiving pleasure with a gentleness born of deep affection. Matthew kissed every inch of her scar, erasing years of shame with his acceptance, and Martha traced the scars on his back and shoulders, binding their wounded places together into something whole. Afterward, lying tangled together in Matthew's bed that was now their bed, Martha felt a peace she had not known since before the fire. She was wanted, loved, cherished exactly as she was. "I love you, Mrs. O'Brien," Matthew murmured against her hair. "I love you, Mr. O'Brien," she answered, and knew that she was finally, truly home. The seasons turned, and Martha and Matthew settled into married life with the ease of two people who had already learned each other's rhythms. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Matthew's cattle thrived, and Martha's garden became the envy of neighboring ranches. They worked side by side through the warm fall days, preparing for winter, building up stores of food and firewood. By Christmas, Martha knew she was pregnant. She waited until they were sitting by the fire on Christmas Eve to tell Matthew, and the joy on his face made her heart overflow. "A baby," he said wonderingly, his hand splayed across her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" She asked, though she could see that he was. Happy does not begin to cover it. Blessed, grateful, terrified. He pulled her close. "We are going to need to fix up that nursery properly now. We have time. Babies take a while to arrive." She nestled against him, feeling safe and content. The winter was harsh, but they weathered it together, keeping the stock alive and the house warm. Martha's belly grew round, and Matthew treated her like she was made of glass, trying to take over all her chores until she firmly told him that she was pregnant, not dying, and perfectly capable of working. "I just want to take care of you," he protested. "You do take care of me. But I need to feel useful, need to keep my hands busy." She kissed him to soften her words. "Let me be both your wife and a partner in this ranch." Spring came with a rush of new life. The cattle calved, the garden burst into growth, and Martha's due date approached. Elizabeth Morrison visited regularly, bringing advice and baby clothes that her own children had outgrown. The community had fully accepted Martha now, and she often had visitors, women who came to check on her health and bring small gifts for the coming baby. In late April, Martha's labor began just before dawn. Matthew sent for the midwife who lived on a neighboring ranch and held Martha's hand through the long hours that followed. She bore the pain with the same quiet courage she had shown through all the hardships of her life. and Matthew felt his love for her deepen with every moment. Their son was born just as the sun reached its zenith, screaming his outrage at the world with healthy lungs. Matthew cut the cord with shaking hands and watched as the midwife cleaned the baby and wrapped him in soft blankets. "You have a fine boy," the midwife said, placing the baby in Martha's arms. "Strong and perfect." Martha looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and searching eyes, and felt a love so fierce it almost frightened her. "Hello, little one. We have been waiting for you." "What should we name him?" Matthew asked, running a gentle finger down the baby's soft cheek. "I was thinking Michael, after your father. Michael James O'Brien." Martha looked up at her husband. "What do you think?" "I think it is perfect. Just like you, just like him, just like this whole impossible life we have built together." Matthew kissed her forehead. "Thank you, Martha. Thank you for giving me back everything I thought I had lost." Michael proved to be a good baby, healthy and generally content. Martha took to motherhood with the same practical competence she brought to everything else, and Matthew was a devoted father, often found singing softly to his son while walking the floor during the late night hours. The ranch continued to prosper. Matthew hired a young hand to help with the heavy work, and Martha slowly returned to her full duties, though now with a baby tied to her back or napping nearby while she worked in the garden. Life fell into new rhythms, shaped around the needs of their growing family. When Michael was 6 months old, Martha found herself pregnant again. This time she was less surprised and more confident, knowing what to expect. The second pregnancy was easier than the first, and in the following spring they welcomed a daughter into the world. They named her Sarah Elizabeth, after Matthew's first wife and Martha's dear friend Elizabeth Morrison. "Sarah would have loved this," Matthew said, holding his daughter while his son played at his feet. "She would have loved you, loved our children, loved the life we have built here." "I wish I could have known her," Martha said, meaning it. She felt no jealousy toward Matthew's first wife, only gratitude that she had married a man who knew how to love deeply and forever. "She would have liked you too. You are both strong women, brave women. I seem to have a type." He smiled at her over their daughter's fuzzy head. "I am the luckiest man alive, Martha O'Brien. 2 great loves in one lifetime when some men never find even one." The years passed in a blur of growth and change. Michael and Sarah were joined by another son, David, and then a final daughter, Rebecca. The ranch expanded, and the O'Brien family became a fixture in the community. Martha served on the church committee and helped organize the community gatherings. Her scar faded somewhat with time, becoming just another part of her face rather than the defining feature, though children sometimes still asked about it with innocent curiosity. "I was in a fire when I was younger," she would tell them calmly. "It hurt very much, but I survived, and now I barely remember it." That was not entirely true, of course. She still had nightmares sometimes, still woke up smelling phantom smoke and hearing her brothers screaming. But Matthew was always there to hold her through the dark hours, and the life they had built together was stronger than any memory of pain. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Matthew took Martha to the same spot where he had proposed, now built up with more businesses and busier streets. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. "Saying yes to me, taking a chance on this life?" Martha looked at him in surprise. "Regret it? Matthew, you gave me back my life. You gave me love, children, a home, a purpose. You looked at me and saw a person worth loving. Why would I ever regret that? I just want to make sure you are happy, that this is enough for you." "Enough? It is more than enough. It is everything." She took his hands. "Matthew O'Brien, these last 10 years have been the best of my life. I love you more today than I did the day we married, and I expect I will love you even more 10 years from now." He kissed her there on the street, just as he had when proposing, not caring who saw. "I love you, Martha. You are my heart, my home, my everything." They returned to the ranch to find Elizabeth Morrison had organized a surprise anniversary party, with half the county in attendance. There was food and music and laughter, and their 4 children ran wild with the other ranch children, dirty and happy and free. As the sun set and the party wound down, Martha stood on her porch and looked out at the land that had become home. The garden she had coaxed from hard ground, the barn where she had calmed terrified horses, the house where she had found love and built a family. The vast New Mexico sky that Sarah had been right about, bigger than anywhere else in the world. Matthew came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "About that day in Deming when you crossed the street and asked if I could cook. About how one moment of kindness, one person willing to see past the surface, changed everything." She leaned back against him. "About how grateful I am that you took a chance on a scarred woman nobody wanted." "I did not take a chance. I made the best decision of my life." He turned her in his arms to face him. "Your courage, your strength, your refusal to give up even when everything seemed hopeless, those are what made me fall in love with you." "The scar is just part of your story, Martha, not the whole story. And what a story it is." Inside the house, they could hear their children arguing over something inconsequential, Elizabeth laughing at their antics. Outside, the cattle lowed softly in their pastures, and somewhere a coyote called out to the rising moon. The ranch lived and breathed around them, solid and real, a testament to what could be built when 2 damaged people decided to heal together. "Come on," Martha said, taking Matthew's hand. "We should rescue Elizabeth before our offspring drive her completely mad." They went inside together, into the warm light and noise of family, and the door closed behind them on another day in their shared life. The years continued to unfold with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Michael grew tall and serious, taking after his father in temperament and build. He was 14 now, already capable of handling most ranch work, and Matthew had begun teaching him the finer points of cattle management and business. Sarah, at 12, had her mother's practical nature and her father's gray eyes, and could often be found in the garden or helping Martha with the endless tasks of maintaining a household. David, at 10, was the family troublemaker, always getting into scrapes and coming home dirty and grinning. And Rebecca, the baby at 8 years old, was quiet and thoughtful, often found reading in corners or drawing pictures of the landscape she loved. Martha watched her children growing and felt the bittersweet ache of time passing too quickly. She was 43 now, her brown hair liberally streaked with silver, her hands more weathered than ever from years of work. The scar had faded to a pale silver line, still visible but no longer the angry red it had once been. She caught her reflection in windows sometimes, and was always slightly surprised, still expecting to see the frightened, desperate woman who had stood in Deming's dusty street with a hand-lettered sign. Matthew, at 57, had gray threading through his dark hair and lines carved deep around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But he was still strong, still capable, still the solid presence that had anchored Martha's life for 15 years. One evening in late summer, after the children were in bed, they sat together on the porch as had become their habit. Martha was mending one of David's shirts, torn again in some adventure he had conveniently forgotten to mention, and Matthew was working on some leather tack that needed repair. "Elizabeth stopped by today," Martha said, threading her needle carefully in the lamplight. "She said Peter is thinking about selling their ranch and moving to California. Their oldest son wants to try his hand at the citrus business. I heard something about that in town last week." It will be strange, having new neighbors after all these years. Matthew tested the strap he was working on. Though I suppose change is inevitable, nothing stays the same forever. Do you ever think about what is next for us? After the children are grown and gone, Martha set down her mending. Michael will inherit the ranch, obviously, but what about the others? We need to make sure they all have opportunities. I have been thinking about that. Matthew put down his work as well. We could expand the herd, build up more of a legacy to divide among them. Or we could buy some of Morrison's land if he sells, give David a place to start his own ranch if he wants. Sarah has been talking about teaching. Maybe we help her go to normal school in Albuquerque. And Rebecca is young yet. Who knows what she will want? I want them to have choices, Martha said fiercely. I want them to never feel trapped or desperate or hopeless like I did. Matthew reached over and took her hand. They will have choices. We will make sure of it. That is what parents do. We build better futures for our children than we had ourselves. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the stars emerge in the vast New Mexico sky. 15 years of marriage had given them an ease with each other that needed no words, a comfort in shared presence that was its own kind of conversation. The seasons turned again. Michael turned 16 and started courting the daughter of a rancher from the next county over, a sensible girl named Anna who could rope a steer as well as any man. Martha watched her son falling in love and remembered her own courtship, the terror and joy of opening her heart again after so much loss. "He is so young," she said to Matthew one night after Michael had ridden off to visit Anna yet again. "He is the same age I was when I first fell in love," Matthew pointed out. "Young does not mean wrong, and Anna is a good girl from a good family. If it lasts, we will have reason to celebrate. If it does not, he will learn from it. When did you get so wise? I married you." Wisdom by association. He dodged the pillow she threw at him, laughing. Sarah decided she did indeed want to be a teacher, and they made arrangements for her to attend the territorial normal school in Albuquerque. Sending her away was hard, but Martha knew it was necessary. Her daughter needed room to grow beyond the ranch, needed to find her own path. "I am scared," Sarah admitted the night before she was due to leave. "What if I am not smart enough? What if I fail? You are one of the smartest people I know," Martha said firmly. "And even if you struggle sometimes, that does not mean failure. It means you are learning. Your father and I believe in you completely." Sarah hugged her mother tightly. "Thank you for always pushing me to want more, to believe I could be more than just a rancher's daughter." "You are and always will be a rancher's daughter," Martha corrected gently. "But you are also Sarah O'Brien, your own person with your own dreams. Never apologize for that." With Sarah away at school and Michael increasingly independent, Martha found herself with more time than she had had in years. She threw herself into community work, helping Elizabeth organize a women's auxiliary to support the local church and school. She also began teaching reading and writing to children whose families lived too far from town to attend regular school, holding classes in her home twice a week. Matthew watched his wife flourish in this new phase of life and fell in love with her all over again. She was 45 now, confident and capable, respected throughout the county not despite her scar but almost because of it. She had become a symbol of survival and resilience, proof that hard beginnings did not dictate final outcomes. One of Martha's students was a young girl named Clara who had been badly burned in a cooking accident, her hands and arms scarred from the flames. The girl was shy and withdrawn, refusing to participate in group activities, until Martha took her aside one day. "I know what it is like," Martha said gently, pulling up her sleeves to show her own scarred hands, then touching her face. "I know how it feels like everyone is staring, like you are defined by what happened to you instead of who you are. Clara looked up at her with wide eyes. Does it get better? Yes and no. The scars do not go away, but you learn to live with them. More importantly, you find people who see past them to the person underneath. And eventually, you learn to see yourself that way too. Martha took the girl's scarred hands in her own. You are not your burns, Clara. You are brave and smart and capable of anything you set your mind to. Do not let anyone, especially yourself, convince you otherwise. The girl started crying, and Martha held her while she sobbed out years of pain and fear and shame. When Clara finally pulled away, something had changed in her expression, a small spark of hope that had not been there before. You sound like you are talking from experience, Elizabeth said later when Martha recounted the conversation. I am. If Matthew had not taken a chance on me, had not seen past my scar to the person I was, I do not know where I would be now. Probably dead in a ditch somewhere, given up on life entirely. Martha poured tea for both of them. So yes, I speak from experience. And if my experience can help one little girl believe she is worth something, then every painful moment that brought me here was worth it. Michael married Anna when he turned 19, a joyous celebration that brought together both families and half the ranching community. The young couple moved into a small house on the edge of the O'Brien property, close enough to work the ranch but far enough for their own privacy. Within a year, they made Martha and Matthew grandparents with the birth of a son they named Thomas. Holding her grandson for the first time, Martha felt the circle of life completing itself in ways both beautiful and bittersweet. She was a grandmother now, officially old enough to be considered a matriarch of the community, though she did not feel old inside. Inside, part of her was still that desperate, scarred woman standing in the street, hoping someone would give her a chance. He has your eyes, Matthew said, looking over her shoulder at baby Thomas. That same green that caught my attention the first day I saw you. I was terrified that day. Absolutely certain I was going to die alone and forgotten in some dusty corner of New Mexico. Martha touched the baby's soft cheek. I never imagined any of this. Family, grandchildren, respect, love. It seemed as impossible as flying. And yet here you are, here we are. Matthew kissed the top of her head. I am so glad I crossed that street. So am I. Sarah finished her teaching certificate and took a position at the Deming school, moving back home to be closer to her family. She boarded with Elizabeth Morrison during the week and came home on weekends, full of stories about her students and the challenges of classroom management. She was 20 now, confident and educated, and Martha was immensely proud of the woman her daughter had become. David, at 16, announced that he wanted to join the cavalry and see more of the world than just New Mexico. The discussion that followed was long and heated, with Martha terrified of losing her son to violence or disease, and Matthew trying to balance support for the boy's dreams with understanding his wife's fears. I need to do this, Ma, David said earnestly. I need to know what is out there, need to test myself against something bigger than ranch work. Please try to understand. Martha looked at her middle son, so like his father with his gray eyes and dark hair, so young and eager and unaware of how much the world could hurt. I understand wanting more. I do. But the thought of you in danger, of something happening to you while you are far away where I cannot help, it terrifies me. Your mother lost her whole family to fire, Matthew said quietly. Can you understand why the thought of losing you is almost unbearable for her? David's face softened. I did not think about it that way. I am sorry, Ma, but I promise I will be careful. I will come back to you. You cannot promise that, Martha said, tears streaming down her face. No one can promise that. Then I promised to try my best to come back. Is that enough? It had to be enough. Martha hugged her son tightly and gave her blessing, even though her heart broke at the thought of him leaving. When David rode away to join his cavalry unit, she stood on the porch and watched until he was completely out of sight, Matthew's arm solid around her waist. "He will be fine," Matthew said, though his own voice was thick with emotion. "He is smart and strong and we raised him well. He will be fine." "I hope you are right." Rebecca, the youngest, was 14 and beginning to talk about wanting to be a doctor. It was an unusual ambition for a girl, but Martha and Matthew encouraged it, even though they knew the road would be difficult. "If that is what you want, we will find a way to make it happen," Matthew told his daughter. "There are medical colleges that accept women now, not many, but some. We will make sure you get the education you need." "People will think I am strange," Rebecca said. "They already do, actually." "People thought I was strange for hiring your mother," Matthew said. "People think lots of things. What matters is what you think, what you want from your life." As the children grew and pursued their own paths, Martha and Matthew found themselves with an increasingly empty house. It was strange at first, jarring to come home and find it quiet instead of full of children's voices and chaos. But gradually, they adapted, rediscovering each other in the spaces their children had once filled. They took long rides together across the ranch, revisiting favorite spots and making new memories. They traveled to Santa Fe and Albuquerque, staying in hotels and eating in restaurants like wealthy tourists instead of working ranchers. They spent long evenings on the porch, talking about everything and nothing, relearning the art of being a couple instead of just parents. "I was afraid this time would be sad," Martha admitted one night. "That I would feel lost without children to care for." "And do you feel lost?" Matthew asked. "No, I feel free. I love our children desperately, but it is nice to just be Martha again, to remember who I was before I was a mother." She smiled at him. "To have time to appreciate the man I married instead of just the father of my children." "I know what you mean. I love being a father, but I confess I am enjoying having you to myself again." He pulled her close. "We have years ahead of us yet, Martha O'Brien. What do you want to do with them? Everything. Nothing. As long as I am doing it with you, I do not care what it is." They were 50 and 65 respectively when David returned from his cavalry service, older and more serious but blessedly whole. He had seen some action against the remaining hostile Apache bands and had stories that he would share only with his father, late at night when the women were not around to be horrified. He stayed at the ranch for several months, helping with the work and clearly trying to figure out his next step. "Morrison's old ranch is for sale again," Matthew mentioned one evening at dinner. "The people who bought it never could make a go of it in this country. We could buy it, add it to our holdings. Or you could buy it, David, start your own place." David looked up, surprised. "I do not have that kind of money. Your mother and I have been saving for all of you. Consider it an inheritance, just early." Matthew leaned back in his chair. "We want to see you settled and secure while we are still around to enjoy it." "I will think about it," David said, but Martha could see the spark of interest in his eyes. Within 3 months, David had purchased the neighboring ranch and was hard at work fixing it up. He courted and married a widow from town, a practical woman named Helen who came with 2 young daughters. Suddenly, Martha had 3 more grandchildren, and the family kept growing. Sarah met a teacher from Albuquerque at a territorial education conference and fell hard. He was a widower with a young son, kind and bookish, perfect for her scholarly daughter. They married quietly and combined their households, giving Martha another grandson to dote on. Rebecca defied everyone's expectations and was accepted to medical school in Philadelphia. Sending her so far away was terrifying, but Martha was fiercely proud. Her youngest daughter wrote faithfully every week, detailing her studies and the challenges of being one of only 3 women in her class. "She is going to be magnificent," Martha said, reading Rebecca's latest letter to Matthew. "She is going to help so many people." "She learned compassion from her mother," Matthew said. "You gave her that." Michael and Anna's family grew to include 4 children total, and they took over more and more of the O'Brien ranch operations as Matthew slowed down. At 70, he was still capable but no longer had the stamina for long days in the saddle. He was content to let the next generation take over, to serve as advisor rather than primary operator. Martha, at 55, had finally allowed her hair to go completely silver. She was still strong and active, still teaching children and working in her garden, still the heart of her community. But she had also developed arthritis in her hands, a constant ache that reminded her she was not young anymore. "We are getting old," she said one night, massaging her swollen knuckles. "We are getting older," Matthew corrected. "There is a difference. Old is a state of mind, and I refuse to be old while I still have you to keep me young, smooth talker. It has worked for 22 years. Why change now?" They celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a huge party attended by children, grandchildren, neighbors, and friends. Elizabeth Morrison, now widowed and living with her own daughter in California, made the journey back to attend, and the 2 old friends spent hours reminiscing about the early days. "I remember the first time I drove out to your place," Elizabeth said. "You were so cautious, so ready to be rejected, and Matthew just watched you like the sun rose and set on your smile. He saved my life in every way that matters," Martha said simply. "And I like to think I saved his too. We rescued each other. That is the best kind of love story." At the party, Matthew stood up and gave a speech that had Martha crying within the first few sentences. 25 years ago, I crossed a street in Deming and asked a scarred woman if she could cook. It was the best decision I ever made. Martha, you have given me love, children, grandchildren, purpose, joy, and more happiness than any one man deserves. You took a broken-down ranch and a broken-down rancher and made both whole again. You are my heart, my home, and my everything. Here is to 25 more years, and then 25 after that. You will be almost 100 by then," Martha laughed through her tears. "Then I will be the oldest, luckiest man in New Mexico." They danced together under the stars, surrounded by the family and life they had built, and Martha thought about how far she had come from that desperate day in Deming. She had been so certain she was worthless, that no one would ever want her, that her scars had made her unlovable. And then Matthew had seen past the surface to the strength beneath, had given her a chance when no one else would. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest as they swayed to the music. "For what? For seeing me, for choosing me, for loving me exactly as I am. Thank you for letting me. For taking a risk on a lonely rancher and his empty house, for filling it with life and love and everything good." He kissed her forehead. "I love you, Martha. Always have, always will." The years continued their steady march. Rebecca graduated from medical school and opened a practice in Santa Fe, becoming the first woman doctor in that part of New Mexico. David's ranch prospered, and his stepdaughters grew up calling Martha and Matthew Grandma, and Grandpa with no distinction made for blood. Sarah's household was filled with books and laughter, and her biological son and stepson grew up as close as twins. Michael took over the O'Brien ranch completely, running it with Anna's help and making it even more profitable than Matthew ever had. Martha and Matthew moved into the small house that Michael and Anna had first occupied, giving the main house over to the next generation. It was strange at first, living in the smaller space, but also freeing. They needed less, wanted less. content with each other's company and the occasional visits from their expanding brood of grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. On their 30th anniversary, they made a pilgrimage back to Deming. The town had grown and changed, now with paved streets and electric lights, barely recognizable from the dusty depot town where they had met. They stood on the corner where Martha had held her sign, where Matthew had first approached her with his blunt question. "Do you remember what you were thinking that day?" Matthew asked. "I was thinking that I had reached the end, that if I could not find work, find some way to survive, I was going to give up completely." Martha looked around at the changed landscape. "I was thinking that no one would ever want someone who looked like me, that I was destined to die alone and unmourned. And now I know I was wrong, so completely, wonderfully wrong." She took his hand, gnarled and spotted with age matching her own. "You taught me that I was worthy of love, not despite my scars, not even because of them, just worthy on my own terms for being myself. You taught me that life could be good again, that losing Sarah did not mean I was done living." Matthew kissed her hand. "We taught each other. That is what love does. It makes both people better." They had dinner at a restaurant in Deming, spent the night at what was now a modern hotel, and then returned home to their ranch the next morning. Their small house was filled with flowers from the grandchildren, and a huge cake waited in the kitchen courtesy of Anna. That evening, sitting on their porch with the vast New Mexico sky overhead, Martha leaned against Matthew's shoulder and felt profound contentment. No regrets. He asked softly, "Not a single one, you? Only that we did not have even more time together, that I did not find you sooner." He wrapped his arm around her. "But I will take what I have been given with gratitude." Martha Zimmerman O'Brien was 60 years old, her face lined with age and sun, her hands twisted with arthritis, her hair completely silver. The scar that had once defined her was just one feature among many now, faded to pale silver, rarely even noticed anymore. She was a wife, mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, teacher, and community leader. She was loved and respected, feared by no one and pitied by none. And it had all started with one lonely rancher who had been willing to see past the surface, who had asked a scarred woman nobody wanted if she could cook, and whose love had changed everything. "I love you, Matthew O'Brien," she said into the gathering darkness. "I love you, Martha O'Brien," he answered. "Forever and always." The stars emerged one by one overhead, and the ranch settled in for the night around them. In the distance, cattle lowed and coyotes called, the eternal song of the New Mexico high desert. Inside the main house, their grandchildren played under Anna's watchful eye. David's ranch lights glowed in the distance. Sarah's letters sat on the table waiting to be answered. Rebecca's latest telegram, announcing she was returning home for Christmas, was pinned to the wall. It was an ordinary evening, and it was everything. This was the life Martha had never dared dream of, the happiness she had thought forever beyond her reach. And she had found it here in this harsh, beautiful landscape, with this good man who had given her a chance. Her courage had made him fall completely, it was true, but his faith had made her whole again. Together, they had built something that would last long beyond their years, a legacy of love and family, and the stubborn belief that second chances were possible for those brave enough to reach for them. As the moon rose over the ranch, Martha closed her eyes and simply existed in the moment, grateful for every difficult step that had brought her here, grateful for the pain that had taught her to appreciate joy, grateful most of all for the day a lonely rancher had crossed a dusty street and changed her life forever.